Hello everybody and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips, and as usual just a couple of announcements. Remember, the conference is next week. I can't even believe I'm saying that. A week from Friday here in Columbus. Friday through Sunday, amazing speakers like Robert Whitaker, author of Anatomy of an Epidemic, Dr. Richard Ablin, author of The Great Prostate Hoax, Dr. Janice Stanger, author of The Perfect Formula Diet, and Dr. Kelly Turner, author of Radical Remission, Dr. Marielle von Lampen from Little Rock, talking about diet and inflammatory bowel disease. And I could go on and on, but I think you get the idea. Between all that great education and the amazing food, you do not want to be hearing about this after the fact. You want to get yourself here for the conference. And then the other thing is we're looking for food over medicine instructors, and we have a great package deal where you can become a food over medicine instructor, get the women's health certification course for free, and some other packages you might want to take a look at that involve our most popular certification courses. So send me an email at pampopper@msn.com if you're ready to get some more education and teach some cool classes for me, okay? All right, so I have a couple things to talk about, and the first one is a little shocking. I think most people think that cancer survivors are scared straight by their diagnosis, the assumption I think of most people, and I kind of thought that some of this went on, is that once diagnosed, patients are all about, I want to eat well, I want to exercise, I want to lose weight, I want to do whatever I have to do to lower my risk of having a recurrence. But this is what should happen. Unfortunately, it's not what happens a lot of the time. In fact, most of the time, according to research, and a new study shows that cancer survivors eat a slightly worse diet than the general public. Much more alcohol, more foods high in saturated fat, and more sugar. Researchers looked at the diets of 1,533 people who had been treated for cancer and who were part of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, and compared those diets of the cancer patients to over 3,000 people who were randomly selected but had never been treated for cancer. The benchmark for the quality of the diet was really low. It was how compliant the patients were, how close their diets were to the USDA's 2010 dietary guidelines for Americans. The optimal score was 100, which signified complete adherence to the dietary guidelines. Scores for the cancer survivors and controls were really very close. The cancer survivors had an average score of 47.2, while people who didn't have cancer scored an average of 48.3. In other words, even using the not-so-good USDA HHS guidelines, most people, the whole gang, was eating a terrible diet. It's just that the cancer survivors' diets were a tiny bit worse. They consume less fiber, more fat, more sugar. They consume less vitamin D. And I included this because I just can't resist having this discussion. Vitamin D is a hormone that is produced in response to sunlight. The misunderstanding about it is so terrible now and is so pervasive that it's now included in food frequency questionnaires. I mean, this makes me crazy, but anyway, I won't spend a lot of time on that. Cancer survivors ate 112% of the daily recommended limit for saturated fat. Now, I want to point out something. The statistics are miserable, but they're probably far worse than what this shows, because this is all based on self-reported data, and studies are very clear that self-reported data, what happens is people they over-exaggerate the good things that they do, and they don't fully disclose the bad things that they do. So in all likelihood, all of these diets are far worse than what you actually are hearing about here. The lead author of the study attributed the poor diets of the cancer survivors to several factors, including changes in their tastes for food because of the treatment, emotional distress, and bad eating habits that were established before the cancer diagnosis. And I'm sure that some of that is true, but I'll tell you why the cancer survivors are not eating better. It's because nobody is telling them the relationship between diet and cancer and the role of diet in preventing, stopping, or treating cancer and preventing recurrence. In fact, the opposite happens a lot of times. Many of our members have been told by their oncologists that their diet did not contribute to their cancer, and it has nothing to do with getting well. Our folks have been told, drink milkshakes, eat cheeseburgers, anything you want just to get the calories in, because sometimes treatment results in reduced appetites or difficulty eating. So cancer patients and survivors will eat better and maybe even eat optimally when their trusted doctors begin telling them the right things about this, and when they find resources like Wellness Forum Health who can share evidence with them about the relationship between diet and cancer, which is pretty compelling as it turns out. So really, this made me very sad, very, very sad. If you're a member of Wellness Forum and a cancer survivor and you know the right way to eat, thank your lucky stars that you found us, because what this says is most people aren't so lucky as you are. Okay, so while we're on the subject of terrible dietary guidelines, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee reported in February of 2015 this year that cholesterol in foods doesn't increase blood levels of cholesterol. Now this is music to the ears of the paleo folks and the members of the Weston Price Foundation and people like that who've been insisting for years that animal foods and saturated fat and cholesterol are essential ingredients in the diet. And they not only tell people that dietary cholesterol doesn't increase blood cholesterol levels, but that blood cholesterol levels don't matter. And there are other articles about this issue in the Health Briefs online library. But for Americans who are looking for permission to eat animal foods, the USDA could not have made that permission more explicit than they did by making these statements. But here's the thing, does research show that dietary cholesterol doesn't increase blood cholesterol levels? Well, yes and no. All right, so here's the story behind this, and I think it's kind of interesting. Early studies, and there were hundreds of them, showed that dietary cholesterol raised serum cholesterol levels a lot. Most of these studies were funded by the government. 4 meta-analyses definitively showed this to be the case, and government funding for cholesterol studies was reduced. So cholesterol sort of fell into the same category as smoking. The research was definitive. There clearly were harms. The majority of the evidence pointed in the same direction. It just didn't seem like more studies were needed. Well, confusion began, if you want to call it that, when agricultural groups, particularly the egg industry, started funding research. In fact, the egg industry launched a very successful advertising campaign at the same time designed to increase egg consumption called the Incredible Edible Egg. Well, by 2013, 92% of research on dietary cholesterol was funded by industry and agricultural groups. The Egg Nutrition Center was successful in developing relationships with researchers at prestigious universities who were paid to conduct studies designed to show that eggs were nutritious and that even though they're the leading source of dietary cholesterol in the American diet, this didn't cause health issues. The key to making sure research results support your product, I mean, how could this be, right, is in study design, and funders usually get to dictate study design. Several design strategies were used to support the idea that eggs were safe and even beneficial for people to eat. One of those was comparing eggs to other high cholesterol foods. So if you were to compare using eggs to an egg-free substitute, the eggs would look disastrous. But if you compare eating eggs to a form of meat that's really high in saturated fat and cholesterol, then eggs look good by comparison. Now, another strategy is to use several dietary changes to mitigate the effect of eggs on dietary cholesterol. So what you do is you add eggs to the diet, but you reduce animal foods and fat and calories so that you show that the net result is that the eggs actually maybe even improved your cholesterol levels. Well, the egg-sponsored researchers, who then conducted meta-analyses on the studies, conveniently omitted those hundreds of older studies that showed the opposite to be true. So, thus we have the confusion about eggs and cholesterol. Now, it's hard to imagine that the Dietary Guidelines Committee members did not know that they should consider things like industry funding and study design as part of their review. So we can conclude that these committee members are either incredibly incompetent or have conflicts of interest themselves, and that has proven to be the case. In fact, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine sued and won a case about this conflict of interest issue with Dietary Guidelines Committee members. Well, the situation makes apparent several important points. First, the USDA, HHS, dietary guidelines are not to be trusted. Second, you can buy almost any research finding you want to, and the food and ag companies are real good at doing it. And third, if the government and its committees aren't going to tell you the truth, then you better get the right information yourself. I mean, every week I send out these broadcasts, and they all point in the same direction, which is consumers had best take responsibility for their health and making the choices based on evidence and not relying on media and government and ag industries to tell you the truth about food. All right, that's all for today. Have a great one. Pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you on Thursday with more news.